Hello.
Hi, welcome back to the Red Web. I'm your host, Brad West, with my awesome new permanent co-host, the ever-incredible Greg Burrow, my partner in crime fighting. You can always catch him at Dragon's Lair in North Austin. Also, you can catch us with our volunteer group, Heroes for Texas, so check those out, dlair.net and heroesoftexas.org, as well as Facebook.com/Heroes of Texas. And then our new super awesome co-host, Anastasia. Anastasia is a cosplayer, education director, marketing student, and all-around geek girl greatness. We're going to be following up on an old topic that we long since had a hard time getting to. We started a series last year called Non-Traditional Superheroes. And if you were part of that ride, you got to see some really fun stuff. We defined some of the non-traditional superheroes, and we did a whole episode entirely devoted to dark heroes like Batman and Spawn. And then we did another episode dedicated to anti-heroes like Punisher. Punisher is an interesting one. It's been in the news again lately. If you recall on our episode, and you saw it, we predicted it here on Brad's Red Web. The whole thing with the Blue Lives Matter and the co-opting of the Punisher logo. I find it very amusing that Marvel is now working diligently along with Punisher creator Jerry Ordway to reclaim that and admonish the police department for misappropriation.
And
the military. So that's super fun. So make sure you check those episodes. They are archived here on Kaiju Labs Media's YouTube channel. And we'd love to hear your input and responses to that. Today, we're going to follow into the third part of that series. We were talking about sympathetic villains. It's a more modern trend, definitely, than the other ones. I mean, anti-heroes and dark heroes go back all the way back to the beginning. The sympathetic villain is a little bit different. It probably started around with the advent of the pulp hero and the evolution of the comic book superhero. But sympathetic villains is actually pretty unique. How do we define sympathetic villain? Sympathetic villain differs chiefly from the anti-hero in that sympathetic villain is definitely a villain, definitely does bad, but in addition to wanting them to win, in addition to being the hero, as opposed to an anti-hero who is a villain who is the protagonist of their story. They're the hero of their own story, and you root for them in their own story in spite of them being villains. A sympathetic villain is the villain of somebody else's story, but you feel bad for them. You sympathize, you empathize, you kind of root for them anyway. You want to see there be some kind of resolution. If not for them to win, you want them to be redeemed. This is a very, very big one, and it stretches across all kinds of media, not just comic books. And we were talking about, when we were setting this up before, we all agree that pretty much the biggest name in the sympathetic villain game is Darth Vader. Darth Vader and by extension Boba Fett. Greg, you were explaining why you thought Boba Fett.
Well, I mean, I think that that's going to be later on what we're going to be talking about. But I think that Boba Fett, he is definitely a villain, but everybody, wants to like him because he's so cool. There's no real reason for anyone to like him other than the fact that he's cool, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like he's saved a puppy or did something that makes you feel for him in any way other than him just doing his best to be a villain. So.
Well, that actually is very prominent right now.
Yeah.
Our first point that we're going to talk about when we talk about the sympathetic villain, it's very much the cool factor.
Yeah.
We were discussing on what either makes the sympathetic villain or leads to a sympathetic villain, and there was some back and forth as to which came first. Do we like them because they're a sympathetic villain, or do we want them to be a sympathetic villain because we like them? And there's definitely cases for both, but in the cases of something like Boba Fett, you just plain like him. He's really cool. You want to see more of him, and you don't want to be the bad guy yourself for liking him. So there's a part of you that wants him to be good. There's definitely a huge cascade of where this led to, because let's be honest, Mandalorian on Disney Plus would not be as amazing as it is if it weren't for decades of fans wanting a good Boba Fett. That's all there is to it. So yeah, that's definitely a very key point in the development of the sympathetic villain trope.
And I always say, I know that we kind of disagree on this, but I think Catwoman is the definition of a sympathetic villain, because from the very beginning she's always been a villain, but you always kind of ship her with Batman. You always kind of like, I mean, even the Newmar the Catwoman.
I agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
I agree with
all
you.
the way from the very beginning, the very first appearance of Catwoman in the comics, she was always a thief, a master thief, and Batman let her go.
I think this one's a little bit backwards from what we're talking with the other ones, where the heroes eventually become sympathetic villains to a degree. This is definitely a case where, yeah, I agree. Catwoman definitely sympathetic villain, but she very, to me, especially when she started headlining. I think the fun of her is that she is a sympathetic villain. She's right up there with Ocean's 11. They're robbing these people. There's no two ways about it. They're thieves, okay? They're the bad guys. Their whole entire franchise is you want them to get away with it. In the end, the bad guys win, and that's the point. That's anti-hero. An anti-hero is somebody who's a bad guy but you want them to win. Sympathetic villain, to me, at least from what my research has led to, is they're a villain, but for whatever reason, you kind of want the good guys to lose. And the romantics, the shit part of it, huge. I almost thought you were talking about that earlier, especially when it came to your exposure to the character trope.
Oh yeah, because I mean, growing up, we all had some sort of villain we kind of indulged in, and it's like after a while they started moving everything around to make them like sexy villains, and so it's like you didn't just want to be with them, or you didn't want to be them, you wanted to be with them and be able to indulge in those things you're not regularly used to. And it was always
definitely a 90s.
Well, it's kind of like
product of the 90s where everything was extreme and
90s, early 2000s, depending on what you asked about.
But it's kind of like what you were saying with Darth Vader. I mean, Darth Vader is, by no stretch of the imagination, from A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, he's one of the most evil villains to ever hit the screen. I mean, he's either hand choking somebody, killing them, force choke killing somebody, killing people through a video screen. He's killing people left and right. And he's like, leading the bad guy forces, to kill the heroes of the story and all this kind of stuff. But I can't tell you how many women just find him incredibly sexy.
Right? And then you take off his helmet and you see his cute face and you're like, oh,
well, it's like you're saying,
couldn't be mad at that.
It's like you're saying the relationship tropes. There's always that need to want to fix the bad boy.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, you have to believe that there is hope for redemption. There's got to be the belief that you can fix them. And George Lucas, incredibly brilliant in setting it up in the very strict vein of the old school operas. And Empire Strikes Back, the second you find out Darth Vader is his dad, I mean, that just flips a switch. You're on a whole new idea of, okay, what is a villain? And the entirety of Return of the Jedi is his redemption. I mean, there are those to this day that, still believe, he saved his son. That really doesn't make him a good guy. But at the same time,
he's still a violent genocidal maniac.
Oh yeah, my husband adamantly believes that Snape was not a hero.
He wasn't.
He was not a hero, and does not deserve the posthumous hero status that he has gained in the books, etc., etc.
Right, but that also kind of ties in with the appeal of Darth Vader and some of these other heroes we're going to mention, is that we're not looking at. It's after a while, we're not necessarily looking at the character. We're looking at the actor who plays them, and especially with Alan Rickman. Alan Rickman has a lot of romance movies and stuff where he's just this very
and you know what? Guy. I've actually almost come to blows with friends on this, and then I've had other friends who are like, "Oh my God, thank God you forgot." I don't think Iron Man was. No. Honestly, when push came to shove, I didn't think Iron Man was a good guy. I think the majority of everything that went bad in those movies was his fault, and but there was something to be said about the charisma of the actor. So that goes on to,
and they're still paying for it.
And they're still paying for it. Yeah, I mean, and I get it. I understand. You know, he wanted to save his daughter, which good on him. But for the greater good, he wasn't willing to do it for the greater good. He wasn't willing to do it to save people. He wasn't willing to redo it and reset it 5 years earlier and put everything the way it was. His insistence on he was going to only do it if his one daughter could survive over everybody else, causing, I don't even want to get into the philosophical quagmire that is Endgame. But that does go to one of our other points when it comes to just to defining a sympathetic villain. Definitive portrayals. A lot of the characters that, especially in their, even back to their original media source, became elevated to sympathetic villain status, were done so because of their portrayal by actors or voice actors in other media. And the whole seed for this episode is born of the poster child of the sympathetic villain, Loki.
Tom Hiddleston.
Tom Hiddleston. There is
Oh,
no
yeah.
denying that he made Tom Hiddleston sexy and charismatic and
Right,
I'm
and
like,
he's hot.
yeah,
And
I
he's
mean,
hot.
even my straight friends are like, I agree. Yeah, Tom Hiddleston made evil sexy, and he does, and he continued to do a good job about it. In fact, of all of the characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, he had the best earnest development. Even sacrificing himself for Thor at the end felt natural. It felt like a natural progression. It kind of almost makes me disappointed that they're turning it into a series in a way.
Oh, I'm
because
so looking forward to it.
I know. There's part of me that's like, oh yay, awesome, but then there's also part of me that's like, it kind of cheapens it. Yes, granted, it's a different Loki from a different time stream, so you know, one can say that the main one still sacrificed himself, but at the same time, you know, it's an interesting ride.
But we kind of already had a thing with him dying and being like, yep, no, we need it this time.
We needed this
the next step, and then the next movie, they're like, nah, just
But those of you who grew up with comics, you're kind of used to this.
right.
Yeah.
No one actually
No one
died.
dies. Uncle Ben stayed dead.
Yeah.
Well, there's the Spider-Verse where there's like the Uncle Ben.
There's a Spider-Verse where everything happened.
Yeah,
Come on.
so-
Anyway.
Right, but it's like that's always the appeal. It's like we can just throw in another universe.
Yes,
It's fine. We'll make everyone happy.
Which I think is why everybody is looking forward to the Marvel TV shows. I think the
Gene Wolfe
last.
stayed dead, right? Gene Wolfe stayed dead, right?
Yes, actually. They thought she was alive, and it turned out to be another police officer that was Detective Watanabe. But that's another good story. Anyway, I love me my Spider-Man history. We'll get to that one in a minute too. But the last defining trait that we all pretty much have come to was the rebellious streak. The reason that sympathetic villains are in much the same vein as the anti-heroes, it's not just wanting to be them, it's kind of the wanting to be with them. It's wanting somebody to liberate you from the constraints of societal norms. When we were looking up the Wikipedia definition of a sympathetic villain, one of the main things that distinguish them between an anti-hero is the fact that they know they're doing bad, but they see it as for being for the greater good. It was a little bit more surprising how clear cut that they put it in there the way that they did, but there are many of the best villains. Magneto. Who else did we decide were some of the
Funny enough, that almost sounds like the story of Iron Man.
Oh.
This is true. As I said, I always thought Iron Man was kind of selfish because he really didn't wake up to it until he felt personally responsible for it. He was perfectly willing to let the weapons go and be sold as long as it was in somebody else's backyard.
Right. It wasn't really until his like
It
personally
literally blew up in his
falling
face. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's me. With at least cinematic Iron Man, I am not as well learned in the comic book version. Although I very much
Well, it
love.
changed a lot over the years. I mean, especially when different writers get on and they change the entire focus of the book. So
Yeah.
Mhm.
that's happened on pretty much every book out there. So
Yeah, I know the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and I know the old UPN cartoon, which was like awful in so many good ways. Though, I mean, it was really
Right. Well, and I mean, Marvel has the Marvel movies have a lot of good examples of those kind of spins where it's like you take a very obviously not good person and it's like, we're going to add this. It's like, because I mean, Thanos is a great example of if you actually read the Infinity War books, it's
not even close.
It's not even close to what it is right now.
Noble, yeah.
It's intentional too.
So yeah, in the comic book, for those of you who aren't aware, Thanos, which is literally Greek for death, which is, it surprises me that not once all of these geniuses in the Marvel Cinematic Universe didn't go, huh, his name is Thanos. That means death, right? No, not a one. I'm just going to throw that one out there. Moving on.
They didn't have Wonder Woman with them.
Right? Nobody knows Greek. Anyway, Thanos in the comic book is in love with the entity of death and just kills people to impress this girl. Like literally his motivation. He wants to kill half the universe to get in Death's pants. That's it.
Which would have been a fun story. But
which would have been fun in itself. But modern sensibilities and the idea of the sympathetic villain doing so for the greater good, in theory. And there's actually a lot of philosophical, you can find all kinds of endless threads and rabbit holes on actually Thanos was right kind of thing. And it depends on how you want to look at it. Now, I don't necessarily think Thanos was right, but I definitely agree that 5 years was long enough that you did more damage by undoing it. But moving on. Another really good one in the MCU is, and this goes back to the Disney Plus shows I'm really looking forward to Winter Soldier, Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Oh, that's gonna be amazing.
But Baron Zemo, or I don't think they called him Baron Zemo. They didn't call him Baron Zemo in the show, but in the movie, but they're going to call him such in the TV show. Helmut Zemo's motivation was very much along the vein of Sympathetic Villain. I mean, he had his entire family, his entire city, his world, everything taken from him in his mind by, the entitled superhero of the Avengers in that world, and he felt that everything bad that he was doing was for the greater good of saving people from the Avengers. And so this really hits hardcore with our idea of the sympathetic villain. So that's another really good one and stuff. So
right. Well, and the other cultural shift that I can think of with it is also we're in a time in the last 20-ish years where the idea of who's the hero and who's the villain is starting to switch.
Yeah.
So it's like we used to watch movies where cops were the heroes and the government were the heroes and these are the people we can trust. And now that that's starting to flip over on its head in real time, it's like we're starting to reach out and connect more to the villains, especially and it's easy to do that shift because all they have to do is add that extra backstory where it's like, oh yeah, his entire city was destroyed. And instantly you're like, yeah, and I relate to that.
Authorities. Yeah. Responsible. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's going on the lines of one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist or guerrilla war fighter, vice versa.
Right? It's like that's why Captain America had to make that switch in the movies because it's like you really had to sit there and go, okay, it's like these are who I was originally fighting for, but are they actually the good guys in the situation?
And that's another reason I'm really looking forward to the Falcon and Winter Soldier because they're actually taking aspects of the even without Captain America proper, Chris Evans in it, you're taking aspects of the Captain America comics from decades past. There has been many times where Captain America himself has disavowed the government for those very reasons.
Even recently in the Spider-Man Life Story, where they went through the entire history of Spider-Man in I think 6 issues, and it was really good. In the first issue, because of the Comic Code Authority, they were dealing with issues in this that they couldn't in the regular comics in the time because of the Comic Code Authority.
Mostly the Vietnam War.
Yeah, dealing with the Vietnam War, and so Captain America has to decide what he's going to do. Is he going to go to Vietnam War and, what's he going to do over there because, everyone's expecting him because he's, this World War II soldier who's, Captain America, he's, stands for all the good of America. And he gets over there and he sees what's happening and he actually sides with, protecting the people instead of helping the American forces.
Yeah.
And
there are a couple of times in the comics where he gave up being Captain America.
Yeah.
And one of the first maybe not the first, but one of the first that I actually was familiar with was when he became Nomad, and John Walker took over as Captain America, and they're actually using that story. They're combining that storyline with the time that Falcon became Captain America. So when Sam Wilson was Captain America, and it looks really amazing because it's going to be addressing a lot of that, and they're bringing back Baron Zemo, and so it's going to be. Marvel has an amazing opportunity right now to really make that topical and really make that fit. I'm curious to see how daring they are and how well it's going to be digested by the public.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. So yeah, those are some really, really good ones. One of the things that we had read, we were looking, and it likens sympathetic villains to anti-villains. I'm not sure how I feel about the term anti-villain. It kind of sounds like it makes sense in an aspect, but we found there are many instances where sympathetic villains and anti-heroes are just teeter-tottering off of they overlap in so many ways. And whereas if you watch the previous episodes, we can definitely pinpoint definitively between dark hero and anti-hero, in spite of the fact that many, many, many people who write about comic books confuse the two. Dark hero and anti-hero are not the same thing. Anti-hero and sympathetic villain actually veer into each other's lanes quite a bit. Now, one of the ones that we were trying to figure out, and this is a really hard one to pinpoint into where the hierarchy of hero and villainy is hero's journey. And we talk about the hero's journey a lot on this show when we're analyzing the politics of superheroes. And one of the key things in heroic literature, going back to the beginning of storytelling, the hero's journey, and you frequently will start out with somebody who, by all rights, is not a hero. Sometimes they're just weak and pathetic. Sometimes they're cowardly. Sometimes they are, in their own way, villainous. I know we were all a little bit off on each of us how we felt Han Solo fits into the story. Like me personally, I think Han Solo wasn't necessarily a villain. He just wasn't in a position to where he was held accountable. He wasn't given the opportunity to be a hero. And so when we see him at the beginning of his story, he's got a journey ahead of him. There are others who feel like, when it comes down to it, he still was kind of pretty selfish. I mean,
well, it's not even that. I mean, he starts out and he's a smuggler, which is a criminal activity. He was working with Jabba the Hutt, who is a definite criminal mastermind. And the only reason that he's being forced on the hero's journey really is because he had to drop the spices or whatever that he was smuggling because he was going to get captured. And so he's kind of running from the criminal element and being forced into a hero's journey.
Yeah. So it's kind of a choose your poison kind of thing. And there's definitely on anything we discuss here room for interpretation, which is why I love super books in the first place. But then there are characters who kind of skirt that edge. I know. A really good example of, we're talking about Captain America working for the government and stuff. One of my favorite stories coming out of the 80s was when DC Comics had obtained the rights to several other catalogs of heroes, including those of the Carlton characters, which we would all come to know in a certain vein as the Watchmen, which is one of the first major deconstructions of superheroes and the examination of corrupt power, where do superheroes fit in the government versus vigilantism and anarchism and stuff like that. Now, the character of Dr. Manhattan, who was based on Captain Atom from Carlton Comics. And one of the main things from Carlton Comics in the 80s, besides Captain Atom, who, again, Jerry Conway helped to bring over, along with the Suicide Squad. Those are two great examples of how the definition of heroism in comic books starts to mutate and change. Suicide Squad, for those of you who don't know, DC Comics managed to, when they rebooted their universe, they decided to integrate like about a half dozen other companies they had bought along the way. And they had a lot of really cool superheroes that they could use. But they also ended up having a lot of really less cool supervillains that they just didn't know what the hell to do with.
Yeah.
The whole point of Suicide Squad was that it was a government black ops team made up of villains trying to earn. You've probably seen the movie, you kind of know the gist of it. But the idea was, and what made it so fun and what made it sell at the time, like it did, was that they used like some really, really bad villains. And it was very Game of Thrones in that for the first time ever, you could get completely invested in the character just to watch him get blown up. And that was kind of the fun of it. You had no idea who was coming or going.
That's why I'm looking forward to James Gunn's.
I am looking forward to James
That's
Gunn's
going to be so good.
Yeah, because he's changed it.
Especially with Nathan Fillion in it. Oh my gosh!
Really? And talking about lame characters. I mean, he just used some really crazies in this. Whereas at least the first Suicide Squad was trying to use people that were kind of, sort of, maybe believable. James Gunn is not afraid to embrace the absurd. So just brace yourself for a little bit of a change in tone. But the thing about the Suicide Squad and then Captain Atom that I really liked was in the Firestorm comic book, for those of you who know that Firestorm is my favorite DC characters, they were also examining the idea of nuclear annihilation, mutually assured destruction, and the nuclear arms race. And part of this story gets to where Firestorm decides that he is going to save the world by destroying all the nuclear weapons. Now, for those of you who are old enough to remember the very, very, very illy conceived Superman 4 with Christopher Reeves, this story was literally stolen straight from a Firestorm comic book, like straight up. The only difference is in the Firestorm comic book, it's very amusing that the president, who they don't say is President Reagan, but definitely looks like President Reagan, more or less puts the screws to Superman, insisting that Superman go and stop him. And Superman just straight up tells him, he's like, I don't work for you. I work for the people. Just because you were the leader of America doesn't mean you can tell me what to do. And he just flat out tells Superman no.
Which, of course, is very different from the
movie.
Frank Miller version of that same exchange.
Yeah, right. But I've always loved Superman just like flat out telling President Reagan no. So he gets Captain Atom to do it. Now, Captain Atom is different than Superman in that technically Captain Atom does work for the president because he's still considered a captain in the United States Air Force. And that book, written at that time, again, examines a lot of the issues of use of power and where the government has a right to step in and to what extent. And it's a really good read if you get a chance to read it. And I won't spoil anything past that other than this is the world that we have. I love, my whole point of the show is to show how this is topical. And as much as so much of what's going on in the world is breaking my heart right now, I love that we can actually address it in a forum that gives us some leeway and some space to talk about it freely and comfortably. So make sure at the end of this you like, comment, whatever. Definitely please subscribe and give us ideas. I really want feedback on what we can talk about in the future.
Sweet.
So moving to our favorite anti-hero characters.
Wow, the list is long.
It is a good list.
Oh yeah.
Now we've touched on we've actually touched on a lot of DC characters. One of my favorite, and one that I can't help but personally think, and this goes back to your idea of definitive representation and charisma of the actor. Yes, it was the writing, but the portrayal of Michael Rosenbaum's Lex Luthor in the Smallville of the early of the 2000s. Yeah, this is the first time you ever actually see. I mean, you had everything from the old mad scientist Lex Luthor, the Fleischer cartoons, to the millionaire industrialist sociopath of Clancy Brown's animated series Lex Luthor, and somehow they managed to take elements of both, but then just go completely off book. Many adaptations of Superman have tried with not as much success to create that version of Lex Luthor. And it definitely, while I stand behind Michael Rosenbaum as an actor and his reasons for not being on, there's a part of me that was hurt that he wasn't in the crossover on Crisis, because
he was a big factor of what made Smallville.
Yeah.
Smallville.
It really was. So he's definitely a there's all the way up. Even when they brought him back at the finale, you still kind of were like, oh yeah, now I remember why. Now I remember why I was rooting for Lex Luthor. I really wanted him. One of my favorite quotes, and he did an interview during the run of the show, and they were asking him about when he was going to turn evil and stuff like that. And he's like, you won't know. You won't know. He's like the whole glory of this character and what he was trying to portray is evil is a journey, not a switch you turn off and on. I always think about that when I think about some of these characters, because when it comes down to it, many of your best villains in comics or any media, they rarely even know that they're the villain. I mean, a lot of times they think that they're the hero in their own story.
It's like, I mean, the low-hanging fruit for that one is we just had Joker come out, and of course they try to. It's like he feels like he's good the entire time. He walked out of the movie thinking, "Yeah, I'm the good guy here."
Right.
Basically, close to the end, and it's like, and even if it didn't resonate with me very much, like that resonates with a lot of people that they can follow the journey and be like, "Oh, they're more than just like this mustache twirling, hand-wringing villain. They're actually people with backstories."
Now let's not just compare the mustache twirlers because they can be fun in their own right.
I love
They're death.
I'm a sucker for a good camp villain.
Yes. I do like that though. Let's see. What are my other notes? Oh, Spider-Man. I think has some of the best. And now they tried to do it with Venom. I like Venom as a villain. Sympathetic or not, I like Venom as a villain. I don't like
I
Venom
was
as a
never
hero.
sympathetic with Venom, so
Right? Just like
he was a jerk to begin with before he became Venom.
I liked him as a straight up villain the best. I really did. I liked the constant. It didn't matter what happened. Eddie Brock. Now, whether you blame the symbiote for reinforcing the psychosis or not, he just would not take responsibility for his actions. He just would not, and that to me is what made him so dangerous. Is the self-denial, the rationalization that Venom continuously underwent when they started trying to make him an anti-hero, when they started trying to give him sympathetic aspects, is when I started losing interest in him. And this only has to do with Donny Cates as a writer. His recent run that he did added some aspects to the villain that put him squarely back into Villainville. But he actually managed to create some elements that I liked. That I'm like, okay, this if they'd have done this 20 years ago, I think Venom would have been in a whole different place right now. But as far as the Tom Hardy movie,
it's like, I mean, those kind of sympathetic villains are kind of a turn off for me because they've got it's like, because at least the big story arc with him is that sure, he was kind of bad compared to the other symbiotes that came with him, but after a while he was like, no, you guys are too bad. And that's such a weird, it's like, it would be one thing if he was already in that human environment, but considering he was with them like 100% of the time, and this is just a new change, it was just so.
I think they rushed that
like,
movie.
They did.
I think they rushed that movie. They needed to wait, and they needed to do it in the MCU. They needed to like basically talk with Marvel and see if Marvel would do Secret Wars as the next Avenger movie, and then let him have the black suit. Then just build it slowly, like Marvel did with the MCU. They slowly built it piece by piece and put all the blocks in place to bring this really massive, amazing story together.
And let's face it, Venom was not a sympathetic villain. He was a straight up anti-hero in that entire movie. In the end, like seriously, in the end, what did he get? He got what he wanted. He got away with it. He had seriously, he didn't learn anything.
My favorite sympathetic character.
He still got his career back. He got everything he wanted. He got the interview with the big crazy guy and the successful career and everything. I'm sorry, but that movie was just, no.
I think the best portrayal of a sympathetic villain in the Spider-Man universe right now was Sam Raimi's Dr. Octopus. I think Sam Raimi knocked it out of the freaking park with that movie.
You know,
I like
Vulture
the
was good
Vulture.
too.
Vulture's pretty awesome, but I think that Sam Raimi really built up and really did such an amazing job with Doc Ock in that film with Alfred Molina. I think that that character I don't think has ever been portrayed that well
It's like
in the comics or.
And I think
it was just
I think
incredible.
that's why that they went the direction they went with Vulture.
Yeah.
Is because they took their cues from Spider-Man 2. Because you're
Right.
right. I mean, that was a really. I mean,
If
That
Sam
was
Raimi was
such a
doing it
good
again with
change.
Sandman, if they had just left Sam Raimi alone and let him do it.
Oh, that would break my
again,
heart.
Venom screwed up the Spider-Man movie.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, and that's what's so heartbreaking about them trying to keep restarting Spider-Man, because it's like they've got so many cool villains that could be made into sympathetic characters, and they open the door for it, and then suddenly it's like, nah, fight will be started again.
Well, yeah, that's the caveat with any of the reboots is losing ground on some of this stuff.
Well, that was one of the
Yeah.
things I loved about Homecoming is that it wasn't exactly the beginning.
Yeah.
It was he had already been Spider-Man for a little
Thank
bit.
God.
So
And yeah, definitely Vulture, both Vulture, Sandman, and Dr. Octopus can all be laid to the portrayals of their actors too. Man, that was some
Yeah.
they got top-notch talent.
So
oh my
good.
goodness, Michael
Yeah.
Keaton. I mean,
And
So
it's not
good.
just because everybody knows, like the top of my love crush list is Jake Gyllenhaal, but
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
everybody knows this. Mysterio, even to a degree. I mean, not as well as the other ones, but they gave you enough to go, okay, this just isn't randomly out of nowhere. He's a villain.
Yeah.
You know, yes, he did the perfect blend of equal parts. Mustache twirly and sympathetic, which I think is what sold him as unique from the others. But at the same time, you're not just going, what the what,
Right.
but one of the big things I hate about the movies, they have to kill off the villain by the end of the movie, and I hate that. I think that that's why I loved in Homecoming that Vulture was in jail, Scorpion was in jail. They were actually putting him in jail. That's Spider-Man. Spider-Man doesn't kill.
You know what's really funny about Vulture, and this is what makes him the anomaly? It's not just that he lived; it's that he found out his identity and lived.
And
Because
didn't say anything.
That's the clincher for any. If you notice it, and I tell people this: if you pay attention, Batman is the worst offender with this. Like the worst. If they find out his identity, they die, and not only do they die, they fall to their death. Every one of them. Joker fell off of the church. Penguin fell off of the aquarium enclosure at the Arctic exhibit. Two-Face fell down the well. Catwoman fell off a building a couple of times. Like Ra's al Ghul fell off the train. Like every one of them falls to their death. What's that about?
Right. Well, and that was such a good censure with the Vulture, because it's like no matter what he did throughout the entire thing, for someone to confront him and say, "Hey, I hear you know who he actually is," and he was like, "Nah," just that really sealed the sympathetic villain stuff for us, because we're like, "Oh, this never happens."
Because he knows he's a kid and it's the integrity of him. And a lot of it, we were talking earlier when we were talking about as soon as a child comes into the idea, that also changes everything with Sandman and his daughter. And that's a really good point for sympathetic villain.
Right, compared to the next movie,
I
where
really
they
wish
found
I
out
could
if
see
he
what
was
Sam Raimi did.
Yeah.
He was like, "I know who he is."
Right.
I really wish we could have seen what Sam Raimi had planned before he was forced to put the black costume and Venom in Spider-Man.
Yeah.
I wish.
Well, I mean, John Malkovich is the Vulture. That was his plan. Was John,
Well, that was 4.
Yeah.
Really?
That was 4. And then he
Sam
was also
Raimi-
planning on doing the Black Cat.
Sam Raimi was trying to write part 3 and 4 together, kind of the way that they, which at that time they're like, "Oh, this is a stupid idea." Now they do it all the time.
Right.
But he wanted to film them consensuously, and they're finally going to have the Lizard, because if you paid attention in like the first 3 Spider-Man movies, Dr. Connors was there with the one arm and everything.
Yeah.
He didn't become the Lizard until Reese Ifans took over. I don't know how much true to it is, or this is the early days of fan casting, but Gerard Butler as Kraven, that would have rocked my world.
Oh my. Oh.
Yeah, right. Now I think they're talking Idris Elba as Kraven, and I could totally get behind that. I could
Oh
totally.
my God.
I would
Right.
eat that up.
And he's another one where if you give him good direction and you write the character well,
Mhm.
he's fine.
Yep.
If you it's like most of the time when Idris Elba does bad, it's because the story sucks.
Yeah.
It's like, so I'm excited now. It's like, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah, well, that'd be great. I would love that. I mean, again, fan casting, I would watch it. I'd buy that ticket, but so yeah, they actually did a really good job. Speaking of Creepin', if you watch the '90s animated series, that was an interesting thing because we've got Disney Plus, and of course I watch all my Spider-Man cartoons, and I've jumped straight from Amazing Friends, where he is this pastiche of hypermasculinity. I mean, he might as well be a Tom of Finland character for as far as this. I mean, they literally call him Mr. Macho, and he's like doing all this stuff because he wants to prove how manly he is. And then you go to the '90s animated series, and they actually do a really amazing sympathetic villain arc with him. I think that's another one of the great '90s animated series. Is they really explored the moral ambiguity of villains and stuff. One of the best ones that they did there, which is leading into his portrayal in the movies, is Morbius. There is a new Sony movie coming out, Morbius, and like I was telling everybody earlier, it's like on the one hand, I'm like, okay, this is what Sony did with Venom. Meh. This is what Jared Leto did with Joker. Double meh. And then I saw the trailer for Morbius. I am so hyped. I don't know what's out there, but it looks so good. And it takes more cues from the animated series than it does from the comic. Even though in the comic he does become a sympathetic villain and switches over to the anti-hero. And even he ends up straight up in dark hero territory. When I was reading as a kid, I love the Midnight Suns. I mention it all the time on here. He was on a supernatural Avengers type thing with Doctor Strange and Ghost Rider and Blade, and so he was actually very, very cool character in that time. So I'm actually really excited to see this. I don't want him to end up on a Sinister Six like everybody's pushing for. I want him to be one of the guys that they pull out of the woodworks to help Spidey fight the Sinister Six.
Right? That would be a fun way to pull it.
Yeah, the McFarlane run of Spider-Man was so good. Even leading up to Maximum Carnage, which, Carnage is more overdone than Venom. But the idea of Spider-Man being so outmatched that he needed help, and then using these other characters that normally weren't in the spotlight, that weren't heroes, like Deathlock and other characters, that was one of my favorite stories. So I'd like to see that.
Right, and considering who they cast for Carnage, I'm sure they're going to indulge in more stuff that they feel like they couldn't with Venom.
That's straight up publicity casting.
Yeah,
and I think
true.
I mean, it's nothing against Woody Harrelson as an actor, but I wish he would take a cue from Keanu Reeves and every once in a while go, no, I'll cast him a role. I'm oversaturated. Just no. I don't want people to get sick of me. That's not going to happen because Woody Harrelson
who's that sick of him?
Woody Harrelson is like the definition of working actor. He's not going to turn out a role, but I mean, he's not quite Nicolas Cage yet, but he's really, really, really close.
Give him a few more years. We'll see what happens.
Now, one of the other characters that's really grown and developed in popularity, when we go back to chicken or the egg, is it the character themselves? Is it the portrayal of the character? I think a lot of it has to do with Margot Robbie, and that's Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn has steadily risen in popularity, such to the point is last year, DC Comics, when they were posting their profits and reports for the year, Harley Quinn had come to match Wonder Woman in scope of popularity of their four most popular characters. And their four most popular, best-selling, best revenue receiving characters: Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, and Harley Quinn.
Yeah.
So that's definitely an interesting one. I mean,
Harley Quinn, when Paul Dini and Bruce Timm first created her in the animated series, she quickly became
a fan favorite.
Especially when she started teaming up with Ivy and Poison Ivy, and that episode is probably one of my favorite episodes where she teams up with Poison Ivy.
Oh,
and
that's
such a good episode.
She very quickly made the jump from the animated series. She was immediately put into the web series Gotham Girls, which was the first time. It was a coup because a new character created for any other media had never picked up that steam that quickly.
Yeah.
And then she ended up in the Mad Love miniseries and then the Harley Quinn ongoing series. Now, Mad Love miniseries,
the comic book did so well that they actually made it into an animated episode.
Yep.
Yes, they did.
Now, granted, once DC took creative control from Harley Quinn from Paul Dini, she quickly went in a different direction.
It started getting darker and darker
Well,
and darker.
like you see my Paul Dini autograph up there.
Oh.
I used to work for the Warner Brothers Art Gallery way back when, and being the consummate super geek that I was, they always had me babysit, handle the talent. And so Paul Dini actually made it over a few times. I got to sit and talk to him for a signing of Harley Quinn #1. And he was actually kind of irritated it took him a while to get back on the Harley Quinn page because, I mean, he literally was like, that's not my Harley Quinn.
Yeah. What was the shift for him?
It was Harley Quinn #1.
Yay, good.
Harley Quinn #1. Like he was there and he endorsed the Mad Love. But when she went up to her first solo series, he's like, because there's always people who go in that camp of, there is a sympathetic villain aspects of her falling for Joker, and those are good aspects because then she's a psychologist and she's got empathy and she's more than a strong character. She's a character that cares, and it's the Joker manipulating her and taking advantage of her, but he's taking advantage of her because she has a loving, trusting nature. And so that's a part of her that always made her a good, strong character. And that's the basis which we eventually would come back and turn around to. And we're getting in the new animated series and the Birds of Prey movie. You get to see that side of it. But then before that, though, there was a dark period, like I said, where it was more like she was in an abusive relationship, and it made her. There are a lot of fans who are in the camp of it makes her weak. There are other camp that means that doesn't necessarily make her weak, because there's a lot of abused women who are not inherently weak, Yeah. And so there's a lot of really. We could do a whole episode alone on Harley. Right? We could do multiple episodes of her, and I think that
also
if you
not to
want
mention-
to, right? If you want to
Like,
request
comment,
it.
and subscribe. Come on.
Yeah, not to mention, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've heard that the DC turned her into the DC version of Deadpool.
Yeah.
It wasn't. Arlene Sorkin did such an amazing job with the character from the very beginning, and really made that character such a special character. And then I really kind of felt like for years they turned her into something different just to try to get sales, or I don't know. They didn't even pay attention to what made her a popular character to begin with.
They just sold her out. That's all there's to it. And you're right. They wanted her to be their Deadpool. That's right on the nose. And I think again, Margot Robbie. I mean, I was not a super big fan of Suicide Squad 1.
No one really was.
I liked her portrayal.
I liked her portrayal.
She's good.
I was shocked at how thoroughly I enjoyed Birds of Prey.
Oh yeah,
it's just an amazing movie. It is to me on the top of my list of superhero movies. I mean, and it's got all of the best beats. It's got character development. It's got a fun story. Yeah, it's a little simplified, but it's it's comic book world, so we have to cut the fat somewhere. But it moves well. It's choreographed well. The soundtrack is great. It's choreographed well. It is by no means Oscar material, but by Lord, it is one of the.
It's a fun movie.
It's a fun movie, and it really is.
And it's another indicator of a cultural shift, because it's like when we talk about abuse, it used to be just sort of, the strong ones were the ones who sat back and they took it, and it's like, or they just were in such an intense situation they couldn't do anything else, and they really started to make her like break free of it and stand up for herself and like really come into her own. And that is the kind of support that a lot of people who endured abuse needed. And so not only was she a cool character and Margot Robbie like played her perfectly, this is a thing that resonates with enough people that it'll keep gaining traction.
Yeah, honestly, before I got to see the new movie, when they said, animated Harley Quinn series, I'm like, okay, this is just more cashing in.
It's like I was one of the ones who told you it'd be good.
It is. It is. You can't deny it. It's good, and it's because of that. It's sympathetic villain and growth of a character and hero's journey. Any other characters y'all want to throw out there for your favorites? That represent like the epitome of the sympathetic villain.
Wow.
There's a
just
lot.
so
There's
many.
good ones.
We
There's good
can
ones.
go on and on.
Yeah, I think
That
Catwoman's
was
always been one of my favorites.
Catwoman. Yeah. I mean, Spider-Man has
Black Cat.
Spider-Man has a good history of anti-heroes. Like a lot of his characters. There's a character called Cardiac, who I love this character. He is a Spider-Man villain. He is a doctor, a scientist who is super brilliant. And he put himself in school. Him and his brother were from a poor community, and his brother had this incurable heart disease, and he became a heart doctor and a biochemist. And his brother dies, and like a couple years after his brother dies, being a heart doctor, a biochemist trying to find a cure, he discovers a pharmaceutical company had the cure many years before, and they were just waiting for the right time to make it profitable, and they let his brother die. And so he ended up going out being like anti-corporation, destroying corporations, lots of collateral damage. But in the end, and if you watch Batwoman, hands down, my husband and I, our favorite character on that show is Mary. I swear to God. CW, when you create an original character to glue a show together, you nail it on the head every time. From Diggle to Detective West, whatever it is, we now put that glue in there. It is some hardcore super glue. And Mary is an amazing character. But much in the same way that Mary ends up having, her underground clinic where she's helping people. Spider-Man and Cardiac come to an agreement. Spider-Man kind of lets him get away with certain things. He's like, okay, as long as nobody dies, I would look the other way when you blow stuff up and steal medical supplies. Just don't kill anybody. And then so he's got this underground clinic that he's running. So he's a villain to fun. So that's another fun one. We're talking about Dr. Octopus, and this is a point of contention because there's this. Dan Slott did a lot to move the Spider-Man mythos forward in the comic books. Some for the better, some for the worse. There's like camps divided straight in the middle. But his Superior Spider-Man was a really good instance where Peter Parker and Dr. Octopus switched minds, and Peter kind of psychically infected Dr. Octopus with good and responsibility in his memories of Uncle Ben. So Dr. Octopus decides, okay, fine, I've got to be good. I might as well be really, really good at being good. And he's kind of a jerk about it, but when all is said and done, it did change his character for the mythos for the better. He ended up back in his own quote-unquote body, and he's kind of skirts the edge of Sympathetic Villain now. So it picks up a lot of beats from the Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man 2. But all right, so we got about 5 minutes left, and please tell us what you think about Sympathetic Villains. We'd love to hear from you, your ideas for future episodes. We want to throw in there real quick. Last week, Comicdom lost one of its chief players, a very, very influential creator, Denny O'Neil. Denny O'Neil wrote a lot for Marvel, but he's most well known.
He was editor in Marvel and DC.
Yeah, Marvel and
a lot
DC.
of different stuff. I mean, before his retirement, he was in charge of all the Batman.
He's actually one of the creators that I wish you see my other thing in my you don't see all of them. Yeah. We'll try and get more of them in the next time. My autographs of comics creators I've always wanted to meet. He's up there with Marv Wolfman, and he's an amazing creator. For those of you who are familiar with him, the Green Arrow show, the Arrow show with Stephen Amell, would not have been what it was if not for two main creators, and that would be, one of them is Denny O'Neil. The other one is Mike Grell. If you ever get to read any of the Mike Grell or Denny O'Neil stuff, Denny O'Neil was great for Batman. And if you saw my post earlier, I was only making light of the Bat chest here, but Denny O'Neil actually created the character of Ra's al Ghul.
And Talia.
And all of the ghouls. Which leads to the modern Robin, which leads to a lot of hardcore deep cut Batman mythos. He's not without controversy. We were talking about earlier, during the women's movement, he wanted to make Wonder Woman more relevant by removing her powers and making her an every woman. Some say that it was kind of self-serving. Some say, at least he tried, I say it was kind of like Bewitched, where it's like, this is just a showcase for modern fashion and they're trying to be hip, but whatever. Yeah, if you ever want to see Wonder Woman in non-ironic go-go boots, you can actually check out some of his run on stuff. look him up. One of the biggest things that he was able to do, though, to push comic books forward was during his time on Green Arrow,
Green Lantern.
or Green Lantern, Green Arrow.
Yeah.
Did I say Green Arrow, Green Arrow?
Yeah.
He
You
brought
get what I
those
meant.
characters back into being relevant.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of in a really big slump, and he brought them back.
Yeah, he created a storyline called, I think it was like Hard Traveling Heroes or something, where basically Green Arrow, who Mike Grell had started writing as this like ultra liberal kind of character, and Green Arrow being an intergalactic police officer is essentially Green Lantern. Okay, it's getting towards the end here. Green Lantern being an intergalactic police officer is essentially ultra conservative. And so he kind of put this idea where Green Arrow challenged Green Lantern to like come down to Earth, live among the common folks, so we were to speak, and travel with him across the country, fighting crime, as opposed to being a cosmic hero, being a hero on his home turf of Earth, and meeting people in real struggles and the real people, and a lot of social commentary, a lot of political stuff, and it was a lot of really good stuff. And one of the big ones was teen drug abuse. And so if you've ever seen the cover of Green Arrow, Green Lantern, where Speedy is literally shooting up heroin on the cover, Speedy being Green Arrow's sidekick later on the TV show known as Arsenal. And it was one of the first comic books to really go, screw you, Comics Code Authority. We think these are important issues and we're going to tackle them. So anyway, highly recommend, check out Denny O'Neil, look up his history, look up the character in the comics and his influence on comics. Please check into some of the anti-heroes / sympathetic villains that we've been talking about on the show today. Tell us what you think. Next week, we're going to maybe, fingers crossed, be addressing the business of comics in distribution, the history of the direct market. So hopefully we can show you a different side of comics that the layperson is not familiar with. Otherwise, keep your eyes peeled here for future announcements, future shows. We'd love to hear from you. Please make sure you visit our friends' pages at GB Cosplay. What's your page?
Loveandlounge.com.
Loveandlounge.com. And then also dragonslair.net and the Heroes of Texas.
dlair.net.
dlair.
And then also
dlair.net.
Yeah, dlair.net
Yeah.
/Austin. And also we're on Facebook as Dragon Slayer Austin.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us. This has been The Red Web with Brad West and friends, my amazing friends. And we look forward to seeing you soon.